What happened exactly with the Aaron Jones negotiation? Who is new safety Xavier McKinney? And Keyshawn Nixon, the all-pro. He's back, baby.
You are Locked On Packers, your daily Green Bay Packers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Peter Bukowski, and I cover the Packers for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you find podcasts. You will find Locked On Packers, the #1 Packers podcast on the internet, and the show for fans who know what happened. They want to know why and how. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Aaron Jones, in case you haven't heard, is going to be a Minnesota Viking. And the timeline of what we learned and when we learned it led to a lot of speculation to how this all went down, because Aaron Jones, after many deleted tweets, but a lot of liked tweets, had some feelings that the reported timelines was not actually what happened. The more information we got, the more we could put the pieces together to figure out exactly how this happened and exactly why not only did Aaron Jones leave and go to Minnesota, but he left and went to Minnesota pissed off. So let's rewind. Because remember, we went live yesterday or 2 days ago in the afternoon, Monday afternoon. And so we missed some of the reporting that came late in that evening. And it started with the Packers had asked Aaron Jones to take something like a 50% pay cut, something close to, that was the wording, a 50% pay cut. We now know what the numbers were, at least reportedly. But then in the morning, Tuesday morning, we got the report from Diana Rossini that Aaron Jones was going to be signing in Minnesota on a 1-year, $7 million deal. And I'm doing some math here, and I'm going, okay, well, he was set to make 11 incentives, okay, 50%, 5.5, 6, and he signed for 7. That's weird. So one of three things happened, I say. Either the Packers just never really intended to sign Aaron Jones, and they made a token effort. More on that in a moment. The agent, Drew Rosenhaus, vastly overestimated what the market would bear out outside of Green Bay. Or 3, that Aaron Jones took significantly less than he could have just to spite the Packers. And I speculated at the time, okay, this is probably between 2 and 3 or some combination of those, because it seemed unlikely to me in the moment that the Packers just didn't have any interest in signing a guy that they said they absolutely wanted back. Now, GMs lie all the time, so there's that, but we have real reason to believe that the Packers really wanted him back, and he is the heart and soul of the team. Everything that they wrote about him, everything that they said about him, all of that stuff is true. And then it dawned on me. There's a fourth option here. That the Packers may have drawn a line, a hard line, and said, here's the number. We're not going above the number. And that the number was close enough for Aaron Jones to walk away from the negotiating table. He was not literally, they're not at a table in general, but he was also probably not actually a part of these discussions. And say, that's BS. I want to go play for Minnesota. I want to go play the Packers twice a year because this is bogus. And then we got the reporting, 2 different reports, one from The Athletic and one in ESPN, that what had happened was on Friday of last week, after weeks of negotiation, they were too far apart, and therefore the Packers said, look, we're going to move on. We're going to pull the offer off the table so that if you go out into the market and find that you're not worth what you think you're worth, you don't come back and say, well, we'll take that offer now. And we're in the middle of negotiating with this other running back that we may or may not have interest in. That was the reporting, that the Packers were doing Aaron Jones a solid. And it does seem like it is the case that they told him ahead of time, you're free to go see what the market is going to bear out. We're going to go our separate ways. And this happened on Friday. So it's not the case that Aaron Jones said, oh, they're signing Josh Jacobs, we're out. It doesn't seem like that's how this went down. But Aaron Jones is responding. That's not how this went. That, he said to Rob Demovsky's story, there's 3 sides to every story, I guess. And then I wrote, hey, if the reporting about 50% of the cap or 50% of the pay cut is right, then it must be the case that the Jones camp was asking for way more than the $7 million, or they would have just signed the deal, right? Aaron Jones replied in a now deleted tweet, cap, 3 caps. Basically lies, right? But then we got more reporting from The Athletic that what had happened was the Packers made what they deemed a final offer on Friday last. And that offer was 4 years as a base salary. So that is more than a 50% pay cut on the base. But $2 million in incentives. So you get to 6. And that was a final offer. The Jones camp countered. And the Packers said, thanks, but no thanks. There was no negotiation, according to the reporting, from that point. And the Packers decided to move on. So, my hypothesis seems to have been proven out that what had happened, was they were actually closer than it seems. He ultimately signs for a $6 million base with $1 million incentives. There's $1 million in total comp difference, but the guaranteed comp is much higher, 50% higher, $6 million versus $4 million for the Vikings. And the team that you gave your heart and soul to and bled to is not asking you to take a pay cut again. So I understand the frustration. I understand the Packers going, this is the amount. And I have people say, well, but if you're willing to pay 6, why aren't you willing to pay 7? And to that I say, well, if that's the logic, if you're willing to pay 7, why aren't you willing to pay 8? And if you're willing to pay 8, why aren't you willing to pay 9? If you're willing to pay 9, why aren't you willing to... There has to be a cutoff point. And the Packers decided that they probably knew about what the Josh Jacobs market was going to be. They probably had some inclination that Jacobs would be interested in going to Green Bay. Now, my understanding is he really wanted to go back to Las Vegas, but because he really liked Antonio Pierce. But that's not how this worked out. Now, we can quibble over whether you think that's right, but that was ultimately how this played out. And I understand Aaron Jones being mad, and I understand the Packers saying, look, this is the number. This is the offer. Take it or leave it. We're done negotiating on this. At a certain point, you have to put your foot down and believe in what your number's saying. By the way, the market bears it out. The Packers thought that on the high end, he's worth $6 million. The Vikings thought on the high end, he's worth 7. They're not really that far apart. Like, this was not a disrespectful offer. But I talked to a league source, and they said the real problem with this, in their mind, was the original contract. When you have years in the second half of the deal that were just so obviously never going to be played as they were. When you have years that are 16, 18, 20 in base salary, those years are just never going to be a part of what happens. So you restructure the money. Then you do a pay cut, and then you have to ask for another pay cut, and the player starts to go, what are we doing? We had a contract. But the reality is the contract only existed as it did to inflate the total number to make the agent look good. And guess what? Every new renegotiation, the agent gets a fee. Every new contract, the agent gets a fee. It is actually in the interest of the agent, though, of course, their fiduciary responsibility is to their client. Everyone's fiduciary responsibility on a practical level, on a rational level, is to themselves. So this is just one of those unfortunate situations. I understand why Aaron Jones is mad. I understand why the Packers did what they did. The business side of this can be ugly. But we're going to talk to your boy Q from Locked On Raiders tomorrow. And I think he is going to not change your mind, because I don't know that your mind needs to be changed, but I think he's going to make you think differently about this. The Packers essentially said, Aaron Jones, you're the heart and soul of this team. We wish you well. And then they signed the guy who was the heart and soul of the Raiders. So I understand that's not going to make you feel better because Aaron Jones is the heart and soul of your team. But I think you're really, 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 really going to like Josh Jacobs. And I think he's going to be a similarly beneficial kind of player to this locker room, to the field, to all the different parts of the ecosystem that a player can impact. Josh Jacobs is an awesome guy, an awesome football player, and I think you're going to really like him. None of that is to say that you can't be annoyed at how this was handled. Absolutely. Aaron Jones is annoyed, and I get it. And Packer fans are annoyed, and I get it. And it hurts even more that he went to Minnesota. That stinks. But guess what? That team is going nowhere fast. They're going nowhere fast. And that's kind of the bummer. Like, go to Houston, Aaron Jones, and you can actually win something. Not going to win anything in Minnesota. That's been proven. All right, we're going to talk to Patricia Traina about Xavier McKinney, her perspective, covering the Giants, boots on the ground, there in practice, knowing Xavier McKinney a little bit, covering him every day. We're going to talk to her in just a second here on Locked On Packers. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at BetterHelp. A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. And thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on the Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channel's app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channel's app. Joining me now to talk about the biggest free agent I can remember Packers fans ever wanting, and the Packers going out and delivering. Xavier McKinney, the safety from the New York Giants, our Giants insider, boots on the ground in New Jersey, Patricia Traina. And Patricia, this is such a fascinating day that was for the Packers on that first day of the legal tampering period. So let's go back with Xavier McKinney. So he gets hurt, I think in the pre-draft process, if I'm not mistaken. What was your first interaction with him like? What was your first impression of him when he first got to New York?
Yeah, he was very confident in his skill set. You know, of course, he came from Alabama, where he played under Nick Saban, now retired head coach down there. They had a lot on his plate. They asked him to do a lot of things down in Alabama, and he took pride in that. He took a lot of pride in, being a leader. He took a lot of pride in, doing multiple things within the defense. And he also took pride in being the best he could in all those roles that were asked of him. And I think that carried over with him when he get to the Giants. Now, unfortunately, in his rookie season, late in training camp, he broke his foot. and he ended up missing a good chunk of the rookie season. I think he was only available for 6 games, but when he came on towards the end of the year, he showed, a lot of the promise. He was obviously behind in his development, but he came on and he, showed flashes that kind of whetted your appetite a little bit as to what he could be within the defense.
And it's a defense that asked a lot of him. When did you feel like they settled into figuring out how to use him? Because he's the kind of player at Alabama who played in the slot. He played a modern version of safety, someone who can play a little bit of everywhere. It seemed to me, at least from afar watching him, that it was really not until this last season that they really found the ideal version of him. But when did it seem to you that he was kind of settled in a role for that defense with Wink Martindale?
Well, remember the first couple of years he played with Patrick Graham, and then
Right.
of course, they had the changeover. And Patrick Graham, in year 2, managed to get a lot out of him. They used him just a little bit differently, more so in coverage, which is what he likes to do.
Yeah.
Wink Martindale, when he got here the first year, I think used him a little bit more down in the box, which I always got the impression wasn't what Xavier wanted to do. He did it. Don't get me wrong, but his strength was in coverage. So they kind of went back to, his roots, if you will, using him as more of a coverage guy, occasionally having him blitz, and he just took off, in the second half of last year. He started off slow in the beginning of last year. He played every single defensive snap for the Giants, so it wasn't injury related or anything like that. But they kind of changed up a little bit what they were asking him to do. And they went back to what he did well at Alabama to get, the most out of him. And he put up, career high numbers in a lot of areas, total tackles. I think he had I think it was 116.
Yeah, an
Pass
incredible number
breakups
for a
was
safety.
like 11. So, McKinney's never been a ball hawk, but just getting him back into coverage and doing what he did well really benefited him this past season.
Do you think, let me ask it this way. How do you think things would have changed for him if the secondary talent around him was a little bit different? I mean, they went out and they used a first-round pick on a corner last year. I thought showed some promising things, but corner has been a bugaboo position for the Giants for a while. Adoree Jackson, of course, trying to fill that role there. A safety has to be an eliminator, an eraser in a lot of ways. How do you think things could have been different for him had that been a little bit more stable for him?
I think they would have probably had him doing a little bit less, to be honest with you, because as you mentioned, safety is an eraser. And because they had youth at the cornerback position, Adoree Jackson was a veteran, but Adoree Jackson also missed chunks of times in the 2 years that or 3 years that he was with the Giants. Down in the slot, they went to a committee approach down in the slot, of which McKinney saw occasional snaps down there. So I think if they had been a little bit more stable, you would have probably seen more McKinney as a deep cover guy, which was really one of his strengths and something that he liked to do.
So, okay, the numbers are good. Pro Football Focus really likes him. In fact, since 2019, the number 1 graded deep safety in the league in coverage. If you're the Giants, and this is something you told me on Locked On Sports today, on the day that we covered the tampering period, they felt like this was going to get out of hand for them. But why not spend the money on someone? I know $17 million a year is a lot, but 24 going to be 25, a player that they drafted. Like, why not try and keep or do more to try and keep someone like Xavier McKinney?
Well, I think there were a lot of factors, really. I mean, you go back to the fact that, 2 of his 4 years, he's had injury issues, including the 2022 season when he broke his hand badly in that ATV accident. I know injuries are not a guy's fault, but you take that into consideration. You also take into consideration your other needs on the team. And I guess, the Giants, in consulting with Shane Bowen, decided that, hey, we want to beef up and build from the inside out and put the resources towards the inside. And if you look at what the Giants did, they acquired, Brian Burns in a trade with Carolina.
Yeah.
To play down in, with his hand in the dirt or standing up or whatnot. So they're kind of reversing course here. Rather than pay fringe players, which McKinney would be, they have a guy in Dane Belton who they think can probably step in and do just as good of a job. Maybe not on the same level as McKinney, because look, McKinney's unique just as, everybody else in the face of the planet is unique in their own way, but they have depth there. And I think, they said, look, we could tie up 13 million in this guy minimum, but is somebody going to come along and blow us out of the water, which, obviously the Packers did. And more importantly for the Giants, again, you've got an offensive line that needs to be fixed. You had to do something at quarterback. You had to do something, on edge rusher. So if you look at the moves the Giants made, they address probably their most glaring areas on their team.
Yeah, very different to the way the Packers are built currently. They have a quarterback that they're going to pay, but are not currently paying, a young, very good offensive line that is cheap, that they don't have to put resources in. They've got a group of receivers that are young and cheap that they don't have to put resources in. I think it makes more sense, frankly, for the Packers to say, we'll spend up on a guy playing a non-premium position, whereas the Giants are going, well, we'd rather put that money into Brian Burns. I can't fault them for that. That makes a lot of sense to me, Patty. Like, that seems like the right way to handle that. The defense that Wink Martindale played, much more man coverage based than I think the Packers are going to want to be. Do you lose some of the things that Xavier McKinney is best at in terms of being able to cover tight ends from the slot if you go to a more zone-based scheme, or do you think that fits and it still allows him to do some of the things that he's best at in coverage?
No, I think it's going to fit him fine. I mean, whether it's man coverage or zone coverage, McKinney takes smart angles. He's a smart player. You watch him play, and quite honestly, I can't really say he makes a lot of mistakes. And if he does make a mistake, you won't see the same mistake twice in a season, not let alone a game.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, he's a good communicator back there. He takes pride in kind of being the quarterback of, if you will, of the defense. He had that role for a little bit during his Giants tenure. So I don't think it takes away too much of what he does well. It just gives him an opportunity to maybe tap into some skills that maybe he hasn't been able to use that he does equally as well.
So just what do you think projecting moving forward? I mentioned this is a kid who's 24 years old, going to be 25. The ceiling on him is like, do you think with a little bit of growth and being put in the right positions, being playing behind a guy like Jerry Alexander in at corner and having the front that the Packers do, that this can be the kind of guy who does affect games in a more meaningful way from a big play standpoint moving forward?
I think so. I mean, the thing with McKinney, though, that always kind of drove me nuts about his game was all the times he would have balls thrown in his vicinity and he wouldn't come up with them. So he doesn't seem to have the best hands. Yeah. So if there was one thing I always wanted to see more from him, is him being a little bit more of a ball hawk. And, for all the smart angles he takes and the anticipation and all that stuff, the lack of, big plays, getting his hands on the ball bothered me, I guess, if you will, about his game. But other than that, who knows? Maybe in this defensive scheme that the Packers run, maybe the opportunities will be there and they'll be, he'll thrive at it. I mean, you never know. Sometimes a change of scenery does a world of good for a guy, but that's probably the one area that I would say that, I would be a little squeamish about with his game.
So let's say he's going to play the deep middle a lot for Green Bay. You look at his athletic profile and you go, not really the athletic profile of a guy you want playing in the deep middle a lot. But I was going back and watching some of the tape, and Wink is going to send pressure. He's going to play cover one. He's going to blitz in front. And there were plenty of times when he's out there playing the post and does not look like someone who is a 4.6 kind of 40 player. Still, he only did that about 40-ish% of the time last year. Let's say he has to do that 65% of the time and play that deep middle. Do you think we'd see those athletic limitations show up a little bit more, or is he the kind of player where the instincts, the smarts, you mentioned the fundamental part of his game can make up for some of that lack of pure athleticism?
I think that would be the case. Yeah. I mean, sometimes what do they always say? If you have the intelligence and the, the experience, and sometimes that can help you overcome some of your, physical limitations, your athletic limitations. Is he going to be, beat sometimes? Sure. Everybody gets beat. But I don't anticipate that'll be a big problem with him, where you'll see it, him getting beat like a drum every single game, every single play, because, there is something to be said about anticipating and reading, what the offense is doing and just getting yourself into the right position before the ball gets there. And I think if he can do all that, and he has shown he can, he can erase some of the doubts that maybe exist about whether he's got enough speed or quickness or this or that.
I think it's going to be a fascinating thing to watch. I can't wait to see it unfold, and we'll see if the Packers have more moves to make here to fortify this safety position, maybe the draft corner as well. Patricia, appreciate the time, and people can go check me out on her show talking about John Runyon Jr., which we're actually going to record right after this. Thanks, Patty.
You're welcome.
All right, we're going to end today. A couple core special teamers being brought back in Green Bay, including one that didn't get paid just like a special teamer. We'll talk about that in just a second here on Locked On Packers. You shouldn't have to worry when you buy tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and the best price guaranteed, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. See all the views from your seats before you buy, so you know exactly what you're getting before you show up. Buy tickets in seconds with just a couple taps. Game Time has tickets right up to the start of the event, even an hour after the event starts. It is the place to find last-minute seats. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, the lowest price guaranteed. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on the Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports story of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Tyler Davis coming back. Special teams, core special teams, if he ever plays on the field ahead of Ben Sims or Luke Musgrave or Tucker Kraft, it better be because one of those guys is hurt. The less said about that, the better. But they like him as a special teams player. They like him as more than that, and I don't understand that. I don't want to get into that. Keyshawn Nixon, 3 years, 18. He was making 4. He's now making 6. It's not that big a jump. Let me say that. For an all-pro kick returner. He's probably worth 4 just for the kick returning. Andy Herman teased me yesterday about my pet project about moving Keyshawn Nixon to safety. And after the Packers signed Xavier McKinney, I went back and watched some more of the tape. And what I saw was a player who was constantly being moved around. He'd play in the slot one play. He'd play deep middle another play. He'd play walked up in the C gap another play. He could play everywhere. And then I started to think, Javon Bullard, I was watching some of his tape last week. And there would be plays where he would line up in the slot. Remember, he played slot at Georgia in 2022 and then played more deep in 2023. Well, in 2023, what they were able to do with him, because his background as a nickel, is they could line him up over that slot receiver in a too high look and then trap the quarterback, because now that guy goes deep half and you've got another guy coming down to rob that area of the field. That is a really interesting way to use these players. If you had Xavier McKinney, Javon Bullard, and Keyshawn Nixon could do some of the deep half stuff. He doesn't have to be your post safety. But if you can get him from the slot to haul ass, and it's not that far, and play deep half, and you can create coverage disguises based on that. You can create blitzes based on that. That just gives incredible versatility to your defense. What if you had 3 guys who could legitimately play the post, deep half, or in the slot? True slot. I don't mean against tight ends and running backs. I mean true blue. It's Justin Jefferson, and you're not going to die. It's, AJ Brown. He doesn't play a ton in the slot. It's Deebo Samuel, and you're not going to die. You can actually do the job. That would be an incredible, for someone like Jeff Hafley, who just loves to get in the lab and come up with crazy stuff and, just ideate. hey, what can we do here? How can we disguise this coverage? How can we make this look like this? Man, that would be a really fun thing to have. So even if he's your starting nickel, great. If he's not, move him to safety. And, worst case, you got a really good special teams player. You've got an all-pro special teams player. He can be a gunner. Yeah, $6 million is a lot for that guy. But he's also a culture guy for you. So, some people had some thoughts about, that seems like a lot of money. $6 million. Come on. It's not. But he's number one, he's more valuable probably as a corner. I don't love him in the slot as a corner. But I think he could be a really good safety. I really do. I think his tackling, his instincts, his read and react, it's all gotten so much better. It's the coverage stuff where I think that he's just, the quick twitch movement is not quite there to play in the slot consistently, like every down. I think he can do it sometimes. I think sometimes he can play deep half. I think there could be places where you have him lined up deep half and roll him to the slot, roll him to the overhang, play deep half and roll. And now he's deep middle. He has the instincts and the ball skills to be a playmaker from back there. Doesn't it seem fun? Why do you hate fun, Andy Herman? Tell me. Tell me why you hate fun. He won't. I promise he won't. All right, back tomorrow. Barring free agency, and we'll be live if there's free agent signings. I'll be traveling Thursday. So I'm going to do my best on that, but we will have a show. And we're going to have fun. We're going to have fun. I promise. We're going to have fun. We're going to talk about Josh Jacobs this week. A lot more here to come on Locked On Packers. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you get podcasts. And then Locked On Packers on Instagram, on TikTok, on Facebook, on YouTube. Go subscribe so you can stay Locked On Packers.